Today's market is tough for sellers, and I'm seeing more and more appraisals come in below the price buyers and sellers already agreed to. When the appraisal value comes back below the sales price on the contract, emotions run high and a lot of deals fall apart. Here is why appraisal values are so critical. Most buyers are getting a mortgage, and in those situations, the contract is usually contingent on the buyer being approved for that loan. Loan approval usually requires an appraisal that supports the purchase price. If a contract price is $300,000 and the appraisal comes back at $290,000, then the lender may not approve the loan as the deal sits. Here are a few ways buyers and sellers can try to keep the deal together. The first option is for the buyer and seller to lower the price to the appraised value. In that example, the contract price would drop from $300,000 to $290,000. In my experience, this is a common option when the appraisal is only short by a smaller amount. The second option is for the buyer to increase their down payment and still buy the house at the original price. So in our example, depending on the loan structure, the buyer may need to bring about $10,000 more to closing in order to still buy the house at $300,000. That's necessary because lenders usually base the loan on the appraised value, not the higher contract price. The third option is for the buyer and seller to agree on a price somewhere in the middle. For example, the seller may agree to accept $295,000 instead of $300,000. In that case, the appraisal is still $5,000 short, so the buyer is likely going to need to bring an extra $5,000 to closing. Another option is basically to challenge the appraisal through something called a reconsideration of value. That means the buyer's lender asks the appraiser to review additional information like stronger comparable sales, missed updates, incorrect details, or anything else that might support a higher value. Now, in my personal experience, a reconsideration doesn't often change much, if anything at all, but it can still be worth trying if there's legitimate reasons to justify a slightly higher property value. One important thing to know is that the buyer has to be on board with that process. If the seller wants a reconsideration, the buyer still has to cooperate because the appraisal is ordered through the lender and the buyer is the lender's client. If none of these options work, it's pretty common to see the buyer cancel the contract and get their earnest money deposit back in full. At the end of the day, if the appraiser will not approve the loan, the financing contingency is there to protect the buyer. My advice for sellers is to create a list of major updates, upgrades, repairs, and helpful comparable sales before the appraisal happens. Give the appraiser the best information up front instead of trying to fix the problem after the report comes back. For buyers and sellers alike, think through what you would do if the appraisal comes in short before you ever sign the contract. It's a lot easier to make a clear decision early than it is to react later when emotions are running high. Of course, the best advice I can give though is to work with me so you can plan for things like this ahead of time.